So I apparently made a slight miscalculation as to what people would like to see in the last video on building these, or converting a 4-foot fluorescent light bulb into an LED powered form. Several people have asked me about preparation of the strips and how to connect the wires to them. So I'm actually going to do another one. So I got some more of the strip lighting. I don't know if you can see this very well or not, but I ordered waterproof this time, which has a plastic, let me get this up close to the camera. It has a little dome over the top of it, which is a rubberized coating of some kind that's clear, and it completely coats the strip to keep it waterproof while it's there. Well, unfortunately, that also covers the little copper soldering pads that we're going to have to connect to. We're going to have to solder to these. So we got to take this rubberized coating off just around the pads. Only around the pads, so that we can get to them and solder them. So I've experimented with this a little bit, and I've discovered what you can do is cut it off. Weight the strip down here just to make sure it's not going anywhere. And what I'm going to do is take a razor blade, and I'm going to slice straight down through it. Now you got to be careful and not to cut all the way through the strip. You only want to cut through the rubberized coating, so it takes kind of a delicate hand. You have to be very careful. Don't get in a hurry. That will mess you up every time. And you just simply place it on here and press gently down. Get off to the side. Now you want to check on the side of it and check your depth and make sure that it's not getting too deep, because you don't want to cut that strip behind it, which is actually very thin. It's a soft material as well. So when you get down there, then you can take your thumbnail and pull it apart, and you'll be able to pull it apart right at that groove, and then you simply pull it off. And now what we have, see if I can get this up so you can see that, is those copper pads are exposed now, but the waterproof covering is on the entire rest of the strip, so that will keep it in good shape. So that's step one. Step two, I'll show you how to tin the pads and the wire and how to connect the wires to them. Alright, here we are setting up to hook up our jumper wire to our little strip here. And if you notice on the strip, this is one of the older ones, it should be a little easier to see the design of this. Between the pads there is basically a cell of 3 LEDs, and there is a little jumper on one end, a little black doodad called a dropping resistor on the other side. Now if we look, we see that the minus side, which is clearly marked here, unfortunately it's not marked on the new strip, so we have to cheat and use one of the old ones. And we see that the little black doodad is connected from the minus rail to the center rail, which tells us which one the negative side is. And on the other end of that cell, there is a little silver jumper that connects the plus side to the center rail where the LEDs are hooked up. So this indication will tell us which side we're hooking up to. So now we need to hook up our jumper wire, and we have here our strip, and that's ready to go. We have to apply some solder. It's called tinning. We have to tin the ends, those little pads, before we can connect to them. We want to do this ahead of time so that it's all ready to connect when we're ready to go. So take our little soldering iron and apply it directly to the pad. Hold it in place, apply it directly to the pad, get it warm, and then feed some soldering on top of it. Now you want to do this quickly so that you don't melt the pad or that plastic that's on the top of it. Get it in there real close, get it warm, feed some in, boom, that one's done. Get it warm, feed some soldering in. Sometimes easier said than done. Now we have a nice little solder blob on the end of our strip, so we can solder to it. Now we're going to get ready and set up for soldering to our jumper wire. For that, we're going to use a thing called a helping hands. This is a couple of alligator clips mounted to a heavy base on a rod, and we can clamp our wire into it, and we can clamp the end of the strip into it in close proximity so we can get to it. Now, before we do this, we have to tin the wires as well. We can do that in the helping hands because we can get the soldering iron on one side and the solder on the other. We can't do that with a strip because of the backing, so we had to do it down on the block. But here we go. We're going to get the soldering iron in behind, warm up the wire, and feed some soldering on it. In behind, warm up the wire, feed some soldering on it. Now we have solder on both sides that need to be connected, so all we have to do is put it together and heat it up. Get a little bit closer. There we go. Put them together, apply the heat, solder melts, solder goes back to solid, and it is connected. Do the same with the minus side and the black wire. Put them together, heat it up, melt it, boom. Look at that. Now they are connected, and we're ready to move on to the next one. Alright, next step that we have to do is we have to connect our wires to our connector here. And this is actually a difficult thing to do. It's very delicate. These little lugs on there are very small. They are also at different heights. Let's see if you can see that. The center pin hole is here, and back behind it a bit is where the minus hole is. And that's where we have to connect to. So that means we have to set up our wire in such a way that we can actually do both of those connections, and it's not going to kink the wire in there at all. So again, we're going to use our helping hands to hold it in place while we solder to it. And in this case, we're not actually going to, we're going to tin the wire but not the connector. And there's a good reason for that, because if you try to tin the connector, you will probably plug the hole, and that's not going to be good. So we set up and strip a little bit off the end of the wire. We want a little bit more, not much more, but a little bit more than we had for connecting to the strip. And then we need to measure using the connector, and this is going to be an eyeball operation, to see where that hole ends and where that one goes, and we see it ends about that much further. So we'll pull down a little bit that much further and check the distance, see if that's okay. That looked about right. And we'll see if the hole lines up. Yep, sure does. So if you notice, they are at different lengths, so that we can do this. Now, we want to put the center pin in first, because believe it or not, it's actually the hardest one to get done. The other one's actually fairly easy once you get the center pin connected. You got to feed the wire through the hole, fold it down over the top of the connector. Hold that wire in place. Make sure it's still through the hole. The end of my solder. There it is. And then we just apply heat and solder. Watch the solder flow. You don't need much. Don't get this connector too hot. It's very delicate and it will melt. Even though I'm only using a 600-degree soldering iron, it will melt. So don't get it too hot. You want to be quick, get in and out, and be done with it. So now we can feed this up and feed the ground wire through the hole in the tab. Pull it down so that the wires are the same length. Fold it over. So we want these wires to be the same length inside that connector, so that it doesn't kink the wire or cause another problem. The wire gets folded down along it. Clamp the connector in. The wire held in place. Let's get that rolled over so you can see. Little tab on the top. Once again, apply a little heat and some solder at the same time. Watch the solder flow. And there you have it. So from there, we have this clamp. The end of that ground tab is actually a clamp. And this is so that you can clamp onto the wire. You just want to pinch it onto the wire to hold it. You don't want to put any strain on it. You definitely don't want to punch through the insulation, but you do want to have a firm grip. This will form a bit of a strain relief so that it can take a little flexing on the side. But there it's on there. I got to go get a piece of heat shrink, and then I just put the connector on, the hood of the connector. In fact, I'll show you that right now because it just screws on. Hood of the connector. Gotta pinch them together a little bit because there's a little solder blob out there. Squeeze it together, and it screws right on. I'd flatten my little solder blob down a little bit, and then it just screws right on, and you're good to go. Alright, lastly we need to connect the connector up to our little 12-volt power supply module. So we notice we have our black and white wires here, and we've got our plug with our black and white wires. So when we connect these, we don't want to leave those exposed, so we're going to use a little bit of heat shrink tubing, and we want to get about 1 inch. 2 1-inch pieces. Make sure you do this before you solder. It should make logical sense, but I can't tell you the number of connections I've made and then realized I didn't put my heat shrink on them. So, put the heat shrink tubing, 1 on each wire. And then we need to keep it away from the hot because the heat of soldering, because like I said, heat shrinks it. So we slide them down the wire, and then we get our wires here. Well, we're going to do these one at a time. Get that set up in there. Now, we want to pre-tin this, this wire. We want about the same amount of wire from this side as we have from the other exposed. And we just strip that off. They're clamped up on our little helping hands. Okay, you want to twist the wires together, make sure they don't fan out on you while soldering. Straighten them out. Get them on our little helping hands here, and let's get them tinned. Soldering iron in behind the wire. Get the full length of it. Alright, next wire. And now, take these 2 wires and twist them together. And twist them around each other. The one from the module is a little stiffer than the one from the other one, but you twist them around each other. Get them clamped up. These helping hands make this a whole lot easier. Heat it up. Get a little more solder on them. That's solid. Do the other wire. good solid mechanical connection there. Get it soldered. And then the last step is we take our heat shrink tubing, we slide it over the top of the connections. Get it centered up. Got a little burr there in the solder connection, so I need to flatten that out. There we go. So we get the heat shrink centered up so it's completely covering both sides, nothing exposed. And we take a heat gun, which looks like a big blow dryer, and heat it up. For years I actually used to use a lighter on this and do that, which works fine, but I much prefer using the heat gun today. And there we have it. These are sealed up. They're not going to short out. Module and plug is all ready to go, ready for installation into the lamp body. Alright, so here we are with the last of the technical details that people were asking for, and that is attaching the strips to the reflector, and that I blocked entirely too much when looking at it. So what we're looking at here is we've got a 4-foot reflector, and we've got roughly 4 feet of strip. Now, I'm going to have to be very careful about setting this up because I'm actually going to put 3 strips in the trough, 1 on the ridge, and then 3 strips on the trough. And that will give me a lot more light, but that means I need to be a little more careful about how I align this. So if we look at this, how we're going to set this up, I'll zoom in a little bit, and how we attach it, and we're still using the same shoe goo adhesive, but it's not running a full length of it, it's just in some certain spots, specifically at the ends. So here we have some of our shoe goo, and yes, you should be handling this with gloves. I'm not, because I'm already dead. So it doesn't really matter to me, but in order for safety, you should actually be handling this with gloves. It's actually very difficult to handle with gloves because of the sticky nature of it. But I'm going to put that disclaimer out there that you should be handling it with gloves. I'm not. Yes, I know. And I'm not worried about it. So there's a little dab at the end there, and it goes off a little bit past the end to cover the wires, and I will come back at this at the end and hit a little bit over the top of the wires as well, because I have this waterproof strip for a reason, and that is I want to have it insulated and isolated from anything that I might be using it for, because if you look, there are some paint strips down the top of it because I paint under this. And if I'm going to paint under this, I want to have it as safe as possible. That's also one of the reasons I wanted to get rid of the fluorescents, because fluorescent lights operate at a rather high voltage. And that can cause problems when you have flammable objects around them. They make special lights and special light enclosures for fluorescent lights for painting booths, but I can't afford that, so I would rather just have an inherently safe light while I'm using it for painting. So anyway, like I said, I'm only using this as an auxiliary adhesive, and I'm putting it under the pads, just using that as a spacing. And I'm being very careful to make sure that I'm aligned right down the side of this, because I've got to make 3 passes through here with all of this. And I'm going to want to do that to increase the amount of light that this fixture is able to create. But that is how it's actually done, just little dabs, and the adhesive will hold it in place long enough for the adhesive backing will hold it in place long enough for the additional adhesive to dry, which actually is Shugu. It takes about a week to actually completely dry, and that's acceptable for me. And I'll just have it under a fan while I am letting it dry. Alright, so here we have the finished product. We have another light successfully converted. We just flip the switch and look at all that beautiful light, LED powered and ready to go to work. Now, like I said, Shugu takes about a week to dry, and to fully gas out you need to have it in a well ventilated area because you can tell from the smell that it's got to be in a well ventilated area, but it will do a great job for a long period of time.